The wind came down the slopes of the red mountains dry and thin, whistling through broken stones and rinsing the scent of blood from the ruined tower. Dawn lay 3 arm lengths away, its pale blade nicked with dust, the 5-pointed star in its pommel dulled by dirt and sweat. Sir Arthur Dayne tasted iron in his mouth and grit in his teeth and did not lift his head, listening to the footfalls of the living and the settling of the dead. He had been the last of the 3 to fall. Gerald first, with a crimson smile beneath his beard. Oswell after, angry to the end. Arthur had warded and turned and danced with steel while the Northern Lord pressed hard. That wolf-eyed man who moved with a simple stubborn grace, his strokes honest as winter. The small crannogman had come like the marsh itself, low and silent, a rush of green shadow where Arthur's eye had been led astray for one fatal blink. The point had entered beneath his raised arm, not deep enough to claim his life, deep enough to send him to his knee. And then the Northern Lord's blade had been at his throat, and it was finished. He had expected the kiss of iron. He had prepared all his life to die with his oath unbroken, a morning star falling at last. But within the tower a woman had screamed and then gone strangely quiet, and the Northern Lord did not strike. He stared toward the doorway where a whisper rose like a prayer and broke, thin as willow bark peeled away. The crannogman put a hand upon the wolf lord's wrist. The blade lifted from Arthur's throat. Arthur saw gray eyes in a face that looked not unlike his own in its frowning weariness. "I have my sister," Eddard Stark said, the words flat as slate. "And there is a babe." Arthur did not try to rise. "Then the realm still has a prince." He felt the ache of lost bloom in his chest, heavy as a stone tied to a drowning man. Rhaegar's bright dream, crowned and broken in the trident's red waters. Elia's laughter turned forever to ashes. Children dashed against walls and rumor. A prince in a tower of fallen rock and roses drying brown. Prince. The word was tired and dangerous in the Northern Lord's mouth. Robert is king. Robert is a hammer that has found an anvil. Arthur let his eyes slip closed for a breath, then opened them again. "My vows are not to such men. My vows are to the blood of the dragon. Whatever wins the world breathes at it. Your vows have killed my friends." The Wolf Lord's voice turned rough, and for a heartbeat Arthur thought the sword would finish its work. It did not. "We are not finished with oaths," the crannogman said, soft as reed song. Within the tower, a baby cried, that thin, indignant tremor of a life unpersuaded by war. Eddard Stark flinched at the sound, as if it were a blade slid gently into his own ribs. He looked down at Arthur, and something in his eyes shifted, a look not of victory but of a man balanced on the edge of a choice. "I will not have Robert know," he said, each word a stone laid. "He would kill the child. Whether for fear or for hate, it is the same. My sister." The word failed him like a spar breaking. "She asked a promise. I mean to keep it." "Then keep it fully," Arthur whispered. "Do not only hide him. Swear you will guard what he is." "What he is," Eddard repeated, bitter, weary, stunned. There were 1,000 ways to say it. Son, bastard, heir, danger, hope, and none would sit quiet in his throat. The crannogman moved to Arthur's side with the careful economy of a healer used to doing much with little. He bound the wound with linen torn from some dead man's shirt. His hands were kind and precise and smelled faintly of salt and peat. "We can keep him from notice," the crannogman murmured without looking up. "The swamps remember how to hide. But the prince cannot be kept to mud and water forever. When he is grown, the river will run to the sea." Eddard Stark stood a long time with wind tugging at his torn cloak. "If I kill you," he said finally, "the world becomes simpler. The tale is clean. The king is pleased. No one comes looking with old songs and older swords." "You may kill me," Arthur said. "I have failed before the 7. But if you do, you kill also the witness that your sister wed where the mountains wore a crown of cloud. You kill the man who can say with his last breath what the boy is. You kill the sword that will bend to him when it is time." Eddard's eyes left Arthur's face and fell to dawn, pale as frost, lying in dust. That sword is Dayne's. That sword is mine until I die. Arthur clenched his jaw against the sting in his side. And I will not die while his need is greater than my shame. The crannogman smiled, grasses swaying in a wind no one else felt. There are dead men aplenty here to set a light. The mountains keep secrets well. The world need only be shown what it expects to see. Eddard swallowed something hard. He knelt then, and for a moment Arthur thought he would press steel down at last, grant him ending. Instead, the Lord of Winterfell took Arthur's hand. Not warmly but with a firm grip. A thing done because it must be. Rise if you can, Sir Arthur Dayne, he said. Live if you have that strength in you. Hide if you must. But if ever you betray this child into a crown that would kill him, I will put you beneath the snow with the rats for company. That is my oath before your seven and my gods. Arthur pushed himself up with the crannogman's aid. The world a slow turning. And I will swear a better one. He touched the floor with his forefinger, drew a star in dust as he had when he was a boy at Starfall long before he bore the pale blade. By morning's sword, by the star that fell, by my prince whose harp is silent, I swear to the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen to keep his life and his right. I will be blade and shadow for him until he has no more need of either. The baby's crying had faded to snuffs and pursed little breaths. A creature exhausted by being alive. Eddard Stark stood, turned, and went back into the tower. When he came out, he carried a bundle wrapped in blood-damp linen. His face was washed clean of everything but a broken gentleness Arthur had not known could belong to a man who fought as he had fought. He did not show the child. He did not need to. Do what you must, Eddard said to the crannogman. To Arthur he said, You died here today, sir. I will carry your sword to your sister as proof. I will not speak your name again unless I must. We will see if we can teach the world a story it likes. Teach it one that keeps a child alive, Arthur said. And when Eddard Stark reached the torn cloak to tuck it around the bundle, Arthur saw for the first time the small, pink face. Eyes screwed shut against a too bright world, hair dark as winter earth. The boy snuffled and opened his mouth in sleep, his every breath an argument. Arthur's wound soured on the ride from the tower. The crannogman and his silent green men plied him with bitter teas and stitched him with needle carved from bone. They moved through gullies and dry riverbeds and then down through country that thickened and greened, where the world grew damp and frogs sang at twilight as if nothing had changed except the moon. At gray water watched the air felt like a hand laid cool on a fevered brow. Arthur lay beneath a roof of woven reeds and dreamed he was at Starfall, a child again, looking up at the pale blade above the hearth while his sister laughed and told him stories of knights whose names were songs. He woke to Howland Reed sitting cross-legged near his feet, his brown hands resting lightly on his knees. You will live, Howland said, the word not quite a promise, more like a patient observation. It was a close thing, but the swamps preferred debt to death. There is a child, Arthur said, his voice rough with disuse. There is, Howland said. He is with his uncle. The wolf keeps his word as wolves do. He will carry his secret like a bone and gnaw on it in the dark. He means to call the boy his bastard. The word was a thorn in Arthur's ear. It is not the boy's name. Names are coats, Howland said mildly. The world gives them and takes them and grows into them. We will need the right coat for a time. A warm one, ugly perhaps, but serviceable. Arthur tried to sit and took the pain into his throat as a hiss. Dawn. Eddard Stark will bear it to Starfall, Howland said. Your sister will believe you dead, and so will the realm. If you live, it will be as moss on stone. Present but easy to miss. My sister, Arthur said again, but this time he was speaking of Ashera and not of Lyanna. She will shatter at the news. If she leaps, there is nothing below her but water and rocks. Doran is careful, but grief makes fools of careful men. Howland Reed's eyes were very old just then. When you can sit a horse, we will send word by ways that do not stain paper. Doran Martell is slow, but he is not foolish. The water gardens teach patience. If you are to be shadow and blade, You should begin by catching one falling star before it touches the sea. Arthur slept and healed. He learned the land that swallowed castles in fog and pulled at the feet of strangers until they sank, the reeds whispering yes, yes, yes to every question. He walked with Howland Reed on paths that were not always the same, and he listened to the Crannogman talk as a man talks to one he expects to fight beside for many years, in careful sentences with silences like clean cuts between them. He practiced with a reed sword until he could draw circles in the air again without tearing something new in his side. When he was strong, he left the neck in the colorless dawn. At starfall, the pale stone sword stood white against the turning sea, each wave uncurling like a sigh. They reached at night by a path known to few, the small boats belly scratching softly at shingle. Arthur climbed the long stair with his heart hammering, a boy again at every landing, turned into a man again as he turned each corner. In the great hall beneath the pale blade, Doran Martell waited, careful as a man cradling a jar of oil near a fire. Beside him, Ario Hoda had an axe like a quiet promise. And Ashera stood with her hands gripping the balcony stone and her hair unbound, eyes fixed on some far madness only she could see. She did not hear his step. She did not turn until he said her name, not loudly, not softly, merely as it had been spoken between them 1,000 times. Ash! She froze like a hare sensing a hawk's shadow. Then she turned, and the face that met his was that of a stranger who had been his sister once. She made a soft sound, nothing like laughter, and he covered the space between them in 3 long strides and caught her as she swayed. "Ghost!" she managed against his shoulder. "They said you were a ghost." The heat of her was proof of something. He held her as if he were holding his first vow. "The realm will say I am dead," he said against her hair. "Let it. This house must keep that death well. No tears from the tower. No stones meet the sea." Doran watched them and said nothing. A slow man's mind can turn quickly when it must. At last he said, "Is there any of Elia left to comfort?" The arrow of that name entered Arthur and remained there, never to be drawn. He bowed his head. "Only vengeance, if you still like the taste of it." "I have never liked the taste," Doran said, "but I have learned to drink bitterness slowly." His eyes narrowed. "You have brought me a problem." "A hope," Arthur corrected softly. "A boy left to me by a prince we both loved, and by a northern woman who asked her brother for a promise brotherly and terrible. If hatred is poison, hopes are knives. They cut going in and out." Doran's mouth twitched once, not a smile. "You bring me a boy who can claim what killed my sister's children, and you ask me to shelter him as a bird might shelter a hawk chick." He folded his hands, his rings glinting like small suns. "I am patient, Sir Arthur. I prefer the knife when the meat yields to it and the plate is quiet. But I will see this boy live. I will not see him hunted because you could not hide your shadow well." "No shadow of mine will fall where you do not wish it," Arthur said. He laid one hand against the white stone of home, and he did not reach up for the pale blade above his head, though his hand ached to close around that familiar hilt. "Dawn sleeps in this hall until the day the boy has need of it. Not before." Ashera lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at the sword and then at him. "And if the day never comes, then may it rust," Arthur said, and knew that dawn would not rust, and that prayers had a way of being answered twisted. They made a tale for the servants of Starfall and for slow-traveling rumor. Arthur dead at the Tower of Joy, his sword returned by Eddard Stark with words that did not gloat. Ashera wore purple and then gray, and she did not throw herself from any height. Doran wrapped her in the quiet of the water gardens and gave her soft duties that were rings and keys and watching. Ario Hoda watched everything. Arthur left in a farmer's brown with a hood that made his eyes ordinary. The boy grew beneath the northern sky. Arthur saw him once in those early years from behind a thicket of winterbear branches as servants carried firewood, and a thin dog trotted with the air of a lord at heel. The child toddled in snow, laughed when he fell, and put one mittened hand flat upon the belly of a carved wolf until frost kissed the wool. His hair was dark. His cheeks showed a stubbornness he would never put down. A red-haired woman in a heavy cloak stood farther off with her mouth tight as a seam drawn harsh. She watched the boy and then looked away, and Arthur knew there would be no easy home for him at that hearth, warm though it was. Arthur visited Winterfell rarely and always as a no-one. Once he came as a messenger from the Manderley kitchens with a salted barrel of fish as heavy as gilt. Once as a tinker with hinges and springs. Once in the green of a huntsman to run a message discreetly to the master-at-arms who liked his ale and his memories of the trident faint. He never spoke to the boy. He spoke with Howland Reed, and with Eddard Stark 3 times in quiet places, beneath the wolfwood where the air smelled of pine and old stone, in a disused corridor hung with tapestries of stags and hounds, and once, finally, in the Godswood when the king had come and the castle was swollen with strange voices. Robert Baratheon hunted laughter even in grief. He made a noise like a cask being opened when he saw Eddard and drank like a man searching a barrel's bottom for the past. Arthur kept out of sight, a shadow among shadows, but in the Godswood where the heart tree bled slow red tears into the pool, Eddard Stark came to him alone and did not speak until the water had finished repeating the wind. "He wants me to come to King's Landing," Eddard said without begging or refusal. "He wants me to bring my daughters to marry his. He brings the South like a disease, and it will not stop here merely because I bar the door." "It never stops because doors are barred," Arthur said. "Doors are only impediments to men who have time, and kings always do." "He will look upon the boy if he lingers under my roof," Eddard said, and the word boy had so much weight in it that Arthur felt his own bones take some of the strain. "Robert is not patient. He will sniff, and when he smells what he thinks he smells, no oath or memory will stop him from taking a hammer to the thing he fears. Then do not let the boy remain." Arthur's words came before fear could soften them. "He cannot take the black. He must not. That oath would be a grave over his birth." "Do not speak to me of oaths," Eddard said with a sudden tired rage, his voice low so the trees would not hear the bitterness. "They keep me from sleep and do not warm me in the morning." "We owe him more than a warm morning," Arthur said, softening now because anger thrown at Eddard Stark felt like a blow at a stone statue in a storm. "We owe him a future in which he can choose. You promised your sister." "I swore to my prince. A boy's life is not the wall we build our own righteousness with." Eddard closed his eyes. His breath plumed like a small ghost. "He wants to go," he said, and the helplessness in him would have humbled the proudest of men. "He thinks to join the Watch and make a place where the word bastard is a description and not a brand. He believes the stories. I let him believe them because they kept him from wanting more than I could give." Arthur knew how a sword felt when it hit bone. He let that feeling live in his chest for a moment and then set it down. "Bring him tonight. Only you and the boy. The gods may know if gods know anything. Leave the rest of Winterfell to its sleep." They came when the moon turned the pool to black glass. The boy walked lightly, eyes trying to be fierce and failing toward hope at every glance that flickered toward his uncle. He had a look that had belonged to Rhaegar when a song was almost made and a battle not yet lost. "Who is this?" the boy asked, chin lifting in the way of someone who fears he could be dismissed and dresses himself in dignity as in too large armor. "A man who owes your mother and father," Eddard said. "Jon." Arthur stepped forward into silver and shadow. He did not say prince. He did not say king. He knelt and bowed his head and placed 2 fingers in the water to touch ice and leaves and reflected stars. The old gods and the new had heard him before. It would not hurt them to hear again. "I swore to your blood before you were old enough to lift your head," he said to the boy whose world had been small and warm and cruel all at once. "I swore to keep your life and your right to what you will learn when it is time. I am a sword that will go before you and beside you and behind you, and I will not turn in my hand. This is not for your pride. It is for your choice. If you swear yourself to black, you give that choice away, and I will not see it taken by ignorance." Jon Snow, there it was, the ugly, serviceable coat, looked from Arthur to Eddard and back again. He had his mother's eyes in the way they took a thing in and turned it until it made more sense. "If I am not to be a brother," he said slowly. Then what am I to be? I cannot be my brother's heir. Lady Caitlin will not suffer it. There is no place for me at this table. I can eat in the kitchens and train in the yard, but I am a shadow on a sunny day. I pass over faces and they flinch. Shadows are not nothing, Arthur said gently. They are proof of a body between the light and ground. There are places where shadow is the only refuge a man has. He looked up at Eddard Stark, who had grown silent and stone still. Send him to Greywater. Let him train there and breathe air that does not taste of other men's judgments. The world is not ready to know him yet. Let him grow in the place that eats maps. Eddard exhaled. He placed one hand on the boy's shoulder. John, he said, and the word held more love than the boy had allowed himself to hear in years. There are truths I cannot tell you yet, not because I do not trust you, but because your life would turn brittle in a moment under the wrong gaze. If you trust me, go to Howland Reed. If you do not, go to the wall. Choose your master. John stood with fists at his sides, struggling with the want that any boy felt when praised or when given a door that led to somewhere only he could go. At last he said quietly, "If I go with Lord Reed, will I come back?" "When it is time," Eddard said. "Before then, if you must. And I will be more than I am. You will be yourself with more room." The boy looked at Arthur again. "Who are you truly?" His voice had a testing in it, like a blade tapping another to hear if either would ring. "Truly," Arthur said, "I am a promise given arms and legs. Names are for another night." John laughed, a small, sudden bark of sound. "You talk like a maester trying to make a riddle out of lunch." Arthur smiled back at him. "Let it be meat, then. We will feed you well and keep you lean. And you will not take the black this winter." John looked at the heart tree, at his uncle, at the water, and then nodded as one who has made a compact with himself. "I will go to the swamps," he said. So he went by paths the castle's eyes did not know how to follow. Caitlin Stark slept and dreamed of a house where the tables never wobbled and the light never admitted things that troubled it. Robb Stark wondered where his brother had gone and swallowed his questions, learning early how to command his own face. Sansa sang songs to herself about handsome princes, and Arya hunted cats with a wooden sword and swore no one would put her in a dress that did not have pockets deep enough for a knife. Bran climbed where he should not and smiled down at the world unafraid. Arthur returned to the neck and watched a boy learn to walk the false earth without sinking. John learned to read the wind on water and to put his weight on the safer sod, to move like a thought through the reeds. He learned the sword again, differently. Ser Roderick taught cuts and parries in a northern yard, honest and broad. Arthur taught him circles, taught him to draw a line the enemy did not see and then to be standing on it when the blow fell. Howland Reed taught him patience and stillness and the ways a man could win without being present at his own victory. The Green Men taught him how to move without tearing the world where it was thin. On some evenings, John would lie on his back in a patch of sky and try to catch the shape of a future moving among clouds. It always slipped, but the trying made him stronger. News came to Greywater as it came everywhere in the Riverlands, on the backs of birds and men and on the surface of streams where rumors ran like oil. The hand of the king had died. The king came north and left again, fat with meat and talk. The Lord of Winterfell left with him. The wolf's house howled and then went quiet. In a fortnight men began to speak of a dead king and a golden boy who was not his son, and of a handless truth no one had the courage to hold up. The realm broke like a plate not dropped but set down too hard. "War's weather," Howland said to John as they watched dragonflies stitch blue light above slow water. "It comes whether you are ready. The question is whether you will drown like a stone or float like a log and wait your current." "I would rather be a boat," John said, and Arthur heard Rhaegar for a heartbeat. The prince had always wanted to make a thing better than it had been given to him. Or better yet, a man who knows where he is going. "Even boats need rivers," Howland said without pity. "And men who know where they are going still need road, and bread, and knights that do not try to kill them. For now be log. Do not be drowned. That is enough." Robb Stark called banners. The wind whistled differently across the marsh. It had wolf notes in it. Arthur went among men who had learned to move with mud and spoke with reed captains in voices so low the frogs could not hear them. He sent messages along slow ways that arrived quick because no one else remembered them. Doran Martell sent back messages wrapped in silk and stone. A promise that Dorn would not move first but would move as a rock falls if the right hand tips it. Winterfell emptied of its war men, and Winterfell filled with those who take in war men's absence. The boy Theon Greyjoy strutted on stilts of borrowed pride and did not yet know how deep the water was beneath him. Catelyn Stark rode south with her face more tired than the rest of her, chasing futures that ran ahead like hounds. Bran fell, and then from the west came a tide with no ships on it, iron-kissed and cold. Arthur could not be in two places at once, though there were nights he asked the gods to permit it. He chose the neck's edge and the ford where the King's Road crossed water that did not always like to be crossed. He ended men with arrows in the dark and with knife work the color of reeds and silence. He was not a banner. He was a condition. When Lannister companies tried the swamps, they found themselves walking in circles where no circles were, cursing and then quiet and then gone. Robb's host slipped south laughing like wolves and came back north once winning and once maimed in its pride. Arthur watched the boy lord grow erect beneath a crown he had not sought until it was pressed to him by the need of those who could not bear to be subjects of the gilded children who ruled a gilded city. King in the north, they cried. Arthur had no argument for it, only a complicated sadness. In gray tents and halls smelling of damp wool and fear, men made the same old mistakes with new accents. They forgot to keep their word because their blood was warm. They forgot that the enemy had memory too. Arthur wrote letters in a crabbed hand and signed no name, and those letters found their way to a boy king's hand in the hours before he married where he should not. Robb Stark kept the letter in his coat and read it to himself when he had already broken what it told him to keep intact. Men are clever in everything but their hearts. So Arthur came at last to a crossing no map marked to bar a wedding that should have been a celebration and would have been a slaughter. The reeds had whispered to him of bread and salt twisted the wrong way. He got there by water that offered no help to horses and by friends no one remembered the names of. Howland Reed stood beside him on a bank soft as cake. "They have broken the table," Howland murmured. "It is an old stupidity. We will set another," Arthur said, and he took the small horn he wore for such nights and blew a low note that moved through reed and mud and water with more purpose than any trumpet. What followed would be told as a legend in the neck and nowhere else. Men slipped into a hall beneath lighted torches and out again carrying the living who needed to flee. Others took their places who were well suited for dying. A drunken old lord who had always thought himself clever lived past the dawn because men he would have called bog devils decided his death could wait while men who mattered more were pulled, sputtering and gasping, through windows and into a black river that swallowed like a mother's mouth. Robb Stark went under with a cry and came up with stones in his pockets that someone else had put there, stones meant to keep him down. Arthur's hands were on the boy king's collar, and when Robb kicked and clawed at him with panic, Arthur shook him once as a father shakes a child when time is running and said into his face, "Breathe." Robb did. They came up beneath low branches where a woman shivered, broken not by cold but by the knife that had cut her blessings into curses. Catelyn Stark stared at Arthur with the hard gratitude of a mother who cannot yet forgive a man for not having been earlier than he was. Behind them men died doing ordinary things in an extraordinary place. A knife slid into a kidney, a throat cut in a doorway, a fall from a second-story gallery onto a table that had held salt and bread. The Freys did not learn the lesson they needed to learn. Few men ever do, but the wolves lived. By morning, the reeds had eaten what they could reach, and the crows on the wet roof had done their crow business. Robb Stark sat on a dead log with a blanket over his shoulders and his hair flat against his head, looking more like a boy than a king. Only his eyes said otherwise. "You," he said to Arthur when words returned to him. "I know you. My mother knew you. She stared at you like a picture she had seen once and thought never to see again. Who are you?" "A promise," Arthur said, as he had said before. He knelt in mud. "Your Grace." Robb laughed once and almost choked on it. "Do not call me that tonight." "Then Robb," Arthur allowed, "I knew your father when he was the age you are, and I owed him more than one life. I have tried to pay." Caitlin had wrapped her hands in a cloth as if to bind them to anything but memory. "You are dead," she whispered. "You died with men my husband took south. He brought your sword to your sister. I remember her face. I remember the stone. It is all wrong." "It is all necessary," Arthur said. Robb looked past him at Howland Reed, who stood like a piece of the land. "Lord Reed, you let this man speak in riddles." "Riddles are how the land satisfies itself," Howland said, not unkindly. "Words too sharp leave wounds. We are all a little cut, here at the Trident's Child." Robb lowered his head, and when he raised it again, he had found his crown in the mud and put it back on invisibly. "My banners will think me dead or a ghost," he said. "The Lannisters will drink and make toasts. Fry will whine in prayer. What am I to do now, Ser Riddle?" "Choose your world," Arthur said, as he had said to Jon. "The North can be a country again if you like. You have men who will die to see it. Or you can make a country of the realm with a king who deserves it. There is a boy in the swamps who is owed more than most men get in a lifetime. He is not a tool. He is not a flag. But he is a way through this night that ends with something cleaner than revenge." Caitlin's hands tightened inside the cloth. "Whose boy?" she asked, and the quiet of the question made the air colder. Arthur looked at Howland, and Howland nodded once. "Bring him," Arthur murmured, as if the boy were not a person but a part of the weather they had been waiting for. They brought Jon by night to a clearing ringed by trees that leaned in as if the story itself had gravity. The air smelled of peat and iron. A fire burned, its smoke going up in a neat gray rope as if it were walking to the moon. Men stood around the light and did not speak because speaking would make what was about to happen smaller. Jon came out of the dark walking as a man who knew both his feet. He had grown in all the ways a boy grows that matter. He carried his head differently, not higher but more sure of how high it needed to be. He looked toward Robb, and a crooked grin tugged at his mouth that put the crown back onto the boy king's head better than any circlet. Robb rose and they embraced as if the Reed world were a hall and the fire a hearth, and what had been done to them both by older men and colder women were simply bad weather. Caitlin stood as if held there by someone's hand. She stared at Jon and saw in him what she had allowed herself to see and what she had refused to see, and the two visions struck against each other like flint and steel. Sparks fell into her lap. She let them burn holes in her cloth. Arthur stepped into the light where everyone could count his edges. He took off his hood. He did not reach for any blade. He did not say titles. He looked at the two boys who were no longer boys, who had been forced to swallow more than most men can and still stand up. Then he bent the knee. "Your Grace," he said to Jon, and the murmurs that ran around the clearing were a sound a man might hear in a dream and not be sure later if it had been wind. "Before gods and men, before the trees that remember and the river that forgets, I swear my sword and my life to you, Jon of Winterfell, son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, trueborn by vows witnessed in a mountain place where roses dried on a floor. I am the last of the three who stood over your cradle at your birth, and I tell you this, the world has tried to make you less than you are since the first breath was in you. I will not see it succeed. I was sworn to a crown made of songs and fire. I am sworn now to you. Your birthright is your choice and your destiny both, and I will help you bear each to the measure it demands." There was a silence that felt like a held breath. Howland Reed set his reed spear in the earth and knelt too, and the trees creaked the way ice does when it decides to break. Robb Stark stared at Arthur, then at Jon, then down into the fire as if it might show him a face he missed. When he looked up, he came forward and put his hand on Jon's shoulder. "My father would have wanted the truth," Robb said, his voice steady in the way a man makes it when it has to be. "He wanted it even when it would break a thing he loved. He did not always choose it because he loved us more. But we are not children, Jon. If this be true..." He looked to Howland Reed. Howland bowed his head once. "I saw the vows spoken," he said, each word as if it were laid in a bowl and weighed. "I saw the blood. I saw the lady give her brother a promise to keep. I see the boy now turned man." Caitlin made a sound then, as if something in her had torn, not across, but lengthwise. She stepped forward as if pulled by a rope around her waist and stopped 2 paces from John. "You are not mine," she said, and the cruelty in it was not new, but what came after was. "But you are hers, and I loved her. If this truth saves my children, I will not fight it. If it kills them, I will not forgive anyone who brings it into the light." John's eyes shone, not with tears, but with the water a man sometimes finds pooled at the bottom of himself when he surprises his own heart. "I never wanted a crown," he said, and his voice trembled only at the edges. "I only wanted to be enough for where I was set. If I have to be more, I will be, but only if it keeps Rob and my sisters and Bran safe. I will not trade one family for another." Arthur bowed his head, relief and fear both dropping into him like stones thrown into deep water. "Then we will do it another way," he said. "How?" Rob asked simply. "A council," Arthur said, and the word sounded ridiculous in the night and then sensible. "Bring Dorne and the North and the Riverlords who can still make their own decisions. Show them the witness. Show them the paper that Doran has in a vault at Starfall, a line in a Septon's hand that speaks of vows taken free and uncoerced. Show them the blade that will bend. Let them choose, as men do when they cannot bear to keep tearing their home in half." "Dorne," Catelyn said, bitterness and surprise twisting together. "Dorne will follow a Stark? Dorne will follow a promise kept," Arthur answered, "and a chance to make a kinder future out of the bones of an unkind past. Doran does not move quickly, but he moves with his whole house." "How will we live to see a council?" Rob asked, practical as cold. "The Lannisters will hunt us. The Freys will bleat to cover their shame. The swamps will be your brother's hall until it is safe to build a better one," Howland said. "And my daughter and son will move like weather with men who do not like tents. The wolf is not easy to net." They did not sleep much that night. They ate something that tasted of fish and earth, and they looked at one another in the firelight in the way people do who have agreed to do something outrageous and holy because no sensible options remained. In the morning, they became the air, and the Lannisters rode into places that had been there yesterday and were elsewhere today. It took a winter's length of time in a summer span to make the thing that came to be called the Council of the Wolf and the Star. Messages went south disguised as invoices for lemon cakes and returned disguised as complaints about the price of olives. A maester with one good eye and one that had a cataract like a pearl in it shuffled contentedly around the water gardens, making lists of fountain repairs while carrying in his head the memory of a line in a book that only 3 men had ever read. At White Harbor, the Manderleys fattened their ships with wheat and secrets and swore to feed the North so that it could afford to think about principle and not only about survival. In the Riverlands, Blackfish Tully grinned a grin like a knife and started counting men who were tired of being told to hate their neighbors and would rather hate the men who told them. Arthur traveled more than he had in the years of his official life. He learned every smell the rain has in every valley between the Neck and the Boneway. He sat with Doran Martell in a shady court where water made polite sounds and listened to the Prince of Dornway mercy and anger as if they were fruits he might buy at market. He went to Starfall one night to stand alone with dawn above him and told it with his eyes what he intended. He did not touch the hilt. On the day the council finally convened, the air over White Harbor was bright and salty, and gulls called as if the world were a market day. Men came in with boats and out with hope. The hall the Manderleys offered smelled like wood and wealth and fish. Northern lords muttered in their beards and scratched at the stiff collars their wives had insisted upon. Dornishmen moved like cats led into a kennel, amused and ready. Riverlords carried the weariness of fields burned and daughters wedded where they had not chosen. Their faces held stubbornness like old wine. Jon came dressed as any northern lord's son, wool and leather and a simple brooch in the shape of a dire wolf head. He wore no crown and stood at no dais. Robb stood at his side, and the look between them would have made a harder thing than politics out of politics if men had been a different sort of creature. Catelyn sat beside her son and watched a room fill with the kind of talk that had always cost her more than it cost the men who liked to make it. Howland Reed sat like a reed bundle that had found a chair and liked it. Doran Martell was late in the way a man is late when he is measuring something with his own heart and finding it heavy. When he entered, he brought with him the sound of sandals on stone and patience. He carried a roll of parchment sealed with wax the color of sunset. Ariohoda stood behind him like a kind tree. "Shall we begin?" Wyman Manderley asked, his voice rolling like a tide. "Some of us have fish to eat later." "We begin with truth," Doran said, his slow smile smaller than a crescent moon. He set the parchment on the table and broke the seal with a nail that gleamed. A maester read, and the room listened to words written a lifetime ago by a hand that had trembled not with fear but with the knowledge that it was writing something the world would try to strike from itself. The names of a man and a woman, their intent, the witnesses. Howland nodded when the names were ended. Arthur stood when the maester's voice faltered at a phrase the old man had never expected to pronounce in public. "Not here, not ever." "I stood over them with sword in hand," Arthur said. "I swore then to protect the fruit of those vows. I swore in a tower's shadow when that fruit was born. I am swearing now. I am not asking you to love a dragon. I am asking you to love what a promise kept can make out of a broken realm. The boy is a man. He asks for nothing but the right to choose what he is to be. If you give him that, he will use it to make something better than what is now. Men do not change easily. They mutter and count and remember who made them ashamed and who fed them when the snows came early. They care less for law than for the story they can tell their sons when the sons ask why they died." But slowly, painfully, they measured the boy with their eyes and found him taller than their fears. The great John Umber laughed the laugh of a man who prefers a bold lie to a timid truth and said he would follow the lad so long as the lad did not waste his time and his blood on quarrels that could not fatten a winter larder. Manderley declared that he would bake 100 pies and sing 100 songs and write the names of 100 traitors on slips of paper to be kept under a ring until the day it was right to use them. The blackfish grunted once and shrugged as a man shrugs when he finds his old sword sits as sweetly on his hip as it ever did. Doran Martell did not smile, but his eyes moved to John with the gravity of a man accepting a weight he had long been training his back to carry. When he spoke, he said, "Elia was my sister. I will not speak against her, but I will not speak against truth either. Protect the realm from children on the throne and the men who use them. Protect it from winter. If this boy can be a wall with a heart that beats, I will rest easier at night." John stood, and for the first time he sounded like a man who would let other men put crowns upon him without flinching. "If I am to have any right," he said, "let it be to put the right things first. Winter comes. I have had enough of men who pretend it does not because their halls are warm. If I must be king, I will be king of roofs that do not leak and bellies that do not groan and roads that do not break under the first snow. I do not want to sit a chair that teaches men to lie. If you want that, find some other boy. There are plenty." Arthur felt the room choose, not all at once, not even by majority, but enough. It did not end wars. Nothing so clean ever does. News from the south was a black river. Stannis sharpening himself on law and fire. Renly making banners breed. Cersei weaving lies into cloth for her children. Tyrion setting traps like tableware. A wolf mother prowling the edges of grief. Across the narrow sea, a girl with silver hair learned what fire is for. North of the wall, old things stirred with a terrible patience. But in the north and in Dorne, and where the two met by sea tide and land wind, men began to practice being subjects of a ruler who spoke to them not as children to be frightened or bribed, but as men to be won. And they liked the practice. Arthur did not take dawn from Starfall until the night the dead first came against a village on the bay and left no prints in the sand because the sand was frozen glass. News ran like a rat into the hall at White Harbor, and Arthur felt an old chill that had nothing to do with ice slip beneath his bones. He rode south without sleeping and stood in the hall of his birth beneath the pale blade. Ashera came to him and took his hand and looked at him as if he were already a tale someone else would weep to hear. "You could die," she said, a small smile that had been hers when they were children trying on their father's boots. "I should have," he said back. She lifted Dawn down with him, her hands sure. When he closed his fingers on the grip, it was as if a thought had returned to his mind that he had been repeating clumsily for years without knowing its source. "It remembers," he murmured. "It remembers you," Ashera said, "and it will meet the cold with you." He kissed her brow and went to meet a winter no one had taught him how to fight. The wall's shadow was not a place for banners. It was a place for men who were tired of being men and wanted to be something simpler: heat, motion, promise. Jon came to meet him with a face older than it had any right to be, and Arthur's heart did a small, foolish thing in his chest when he saw him astride a black horse that had opinions and a sword at his hip that looked used and loved. "You came," Jon said, and his grin was the same it had been the day in the reeds when he had mocked Arthur for speaking like a riddle. "I bring a morning," Arthur said, lifting the pale blade so it would catch what little light there was. "We will see if the night respects it." They fought in the blue-black hours before a moonrise, steel ringing like church bells in a village that had forgotten its prayers. The dead did not tire, and the living did. Men broke and were mended with shouted words and shoved shoulders and blows from flat blades that shoved them back into their places in the world. Arthur moved through the ice as if he were drawing circles on a table. Dawn sizzled when it met the cold and made a sound like snow underfoot when it bites just so. Beside him, Jon did not dance. He decided. He made workmanlike choices in messy places and saved more men with them than any flourish ever had. When the White Walkers came, not many, not yet, only enough to make every breath a counted thing. Arthur met one and felt something like surprise and relief. He had wondered since boyhood whether there was anything on earth that would make his sword feel fully at home. He had thought it was other men like him. He had been wrong. He had been born to cut winter. He did not die on that night. That would come later, as all later things do, in a place where the wind bent trees into the shape of beggars and the snow came down so soft men forgot how to speak and only remembered how to breathe. On the night by the village, he lived and watched Jon step into a circle a white thing had thought was its own and claim it. He watched the pale eye cloud of the creature shudder when Jon's steel found it, and watched the boy who was not a boy watch it turn to shards and not congratulate himself. When the dawn finally came, the living stood in gray light with blue lips and teeth set in chattering that sounded like a prayer whose words had been forgotten. Arthur looked east and thought of the first vow he had ever made, a child's promise to a sword on a wall, and the last he had made, a man's to a boy in a godswood. He had not failed either yet, and that was a luxury. They built fire big enough to make men think of stories while their clothes steamed. Jon came to stand with Arthur with his hands held out to be warmed and his eyes bleary with the simple cost of it all. "It won't be enough," Jon said, and Arthur did not ask what he meant, because it could have been any of 100 true things and was the same thing all the time. "No," Arthur agreed, "but it is a step. Steps make roads." "Do you ever wish," Jon asked, "that someone else had been born when you were?" Arthur laughed softly, and the sound surprised him. "Often. And then I remember I cannot trust anyone else to be me as well as I have learned to be me." Jon snorted. "You sound like a maester again. Better than sounding like a knight," Arthur said. "Knights are loud." Jon looked at him with a boy's gratitude and a man's appraisal. "When this is done," he said, "do you think there will be music?" "If there is not, we will make some," Arthur answered. "Even if we only hum under our breath." They did not hum that day. They stacked the dead and burned them and watched smoke go up like words. The wind took it and wrote a message on the sky that no one far away would read. In the south, men argued about essential things that were not essential. In the east, dragons grew in a girl's mind before they grew anywhere else. In the swamps, frogs sang. In Winterfell, a girl found her anger and gave it a name that fit in her palm. A boy in a chair touched a tree and saw more than he should. A queen in the capital prayed to a god with 7 faces and wondered which one would most enjoy the lies she was about to tell. A lonely island smoothed itself with waves. Arthur carried Dawn for a winter and a day. He went where Jon went, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, always near enough that the young king could step left and find him. He killed men who needed killing and spared boys who did not, and each choice made the same ache in him and a different mark on the world. When he died, it was at last without surprise, on the slope of a hill that had once been a barrow and now was just a hill with a view of a road that led toward a city men would fight over long after both of them were beyond caring. He fell with dawn in his hand and snow in his hair, and he did not spill either. Jon held him and said words that tried to be enough. Arthur listened and heard beneath them the promise that had made a life out of a lie and a truth out of a rumor. "You will keep it," he said, and the breath that carried the words came out white. "I will," Jon answered, and because he meant it, Arthur could let the morning go. They buried him not far from where he fell, in ground that was hard but not unkind. Dawn they took back to Starfall, where Ashera stood again beneath the pale blade, and for the first time in many years she laughed as she cried because the world had been cruel but not victorious. Edric Dayne, grown now into a young man with hands that knew how to hold a thing with reverence without turning it into an idol, put his palm to the pommel and felt the weight of a legend settle like a cat in his lap. "Not yet," he said aloud to a sword that did not answer but understood. Jon's birthright had been a question. It became an answer not because men fell to their knees for dragons, but because they stood up for a boy who had always known himself and let him be more. A crown is a thing made of other people's decisions hammered into a shape and heated by need. Jon wore it as a man wears a hat when the sun is wrong and the work does not stop. He built roads and granaries and a habit of telling the truth even when men did not appear to want it. He went north again when the snow came and south when the spring did, and he never sat the chair longer than the time it took to listen and decide. He did not make the realm gentle, but he made it less cruel. It was enough. On long summer evenings at Starfall, when swallows cut threads in the air and the water's skin caught a little of the sky for its own, Ashera would walk beneath the pale blade and tell a child a story of a man who had been a promise, which is another name for a sword that chooses to be a hand before it is a weapon. She would say that sometimes a lie kept for a good reason grows up into a truth that does not shame anyone. She would say that a boy came out of the winter with a morning at his back, and the child would ask, as children will, whether the morning stayed. "As long as men keep their word," Ashera would say, and the child would consider the odds and nod as if to say, "Well then, we had better keep it." And far away in a hall where the walls were hung with maps, a king would make a choice that would not please everyone but would please the morning, and somewhere under a thin moon the wind would pass through a stand of reeds and make a sound that any man could mistake for laughter if he were willing.